Welcome back to my Playwright automation session. In today's video, I'll explain how to automate a radio button using Python Playwright and the page object model design pattern. For today's demo, I'll be using Demo QA radio buttons application. As you see on this page, we have 3 radio buttons. First, let's understand how to identify these elements. So, in order to identify the element, you need to right click and then inspect. So, an element can have n number of attributes. As I already mentioned, it can have ID, name, data test ID. For here, you can see ID. So, you always prefer the stable attributes like ID, name and data test ID. So, now the ID for yes is yes radio. So if you like to let's move on to the next one, which is your impressive. Let's identify that, and even that as a ID you can notice here, which is an ID is impressive radio. That's an attribute for that element. So moving with the no element. So how, let's try to identify the attribute for no element, and you can again see the ID, which is no radio. Now let's switch to our VS Code. Let me open that. So as I already mentioned, we had to create 2 files. One is your page file, other one is your test file. So your page file will contain all the elements and the locators. So the second one is the radio button, so which handles the browser setup and the controls and the overall execution of the test. Now let's start with our page file. At the top you can see import from Playwright. You're importing this from your Playwright. Then you can see the expect function, which is expecting. Now let's create a class. We will create a class with your class name, and this class name represents the page that you're going to initialize inside that. Then you're initializing the constructor, and you have mentioned here the page. That means whatever the URL you mentioned, it will open in a new page or in a new tab. So the first 4 lines, as I already mentioned, this is kind of a template that you need to use on all your page files. Then moving with the line number 6, which is the locators. So we have already used self. So self impressive, that's the radio button, and you are using your locator to identify the element. I also mentioned here for the radio button yes and for the radio button no. So these are the ID for those elements. So once that's done, you need to write a method called def go to URL, and then you are passing the string inside that. In that way, you will pass the actual URL in your test file. Next, in line number 13, I have created a method called radio button page 1, and then I have performed the action. What am I going to do with that radio button? So I'm going to perform the click action. That's the reason I have mentioned here click. Now let's move to your test file. So now what your test file will have? Your test file will have your page file. So you're going to import your page file, and then we have defined a method here, test impressive radio button with sync playwright as P. You are creating an object for that playwright as P. And line number 18, you are launching a browser in a Chromium mode, in a Chrome browser, and then it's going to be a headless. We have 2 options, headed and headless. So now this is kind of a headless mode. So once this application is loaded, you are creating other instance here, radio page, and you're passing the actual URL. So in this way you're passing your value here, and then since this is a radio button, we are not passing any input values. It's kind of an action to perform. So once this is done, you're done with your test file, and it's time to run our test file. So in order to summarize, the test file is responsible for browser setup and controlling the overall test flow, while the page object file contains the page locators and the reusable actions. Let me run this file and show you how that is working fine. This is your test radio button.py. Let's run that. So it's launching the browser and it's loading the page as we pass this page in the URL, and we are asked to perform the S impressive. So that's how. Let's see the result. So this has run and it is successfully passed. Thank you.